The morning sun shone brightly over Dallas, Texas as Chuck Norris drove his pickup truck into the parking lot of Roundhouse Chicken. The restaurant stood proudly on the corner of Main and Oak Streets, its red and gold sign featuring a cartoon, chicken wearing boxing gloves. Chuck smiled at the sight. 5 years ago, this had been nothing but an idea on paper. Now it was a growing chain with 15 locations across Texas. Chuck parked his truck far from the entrance. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a plain blue baseball cap and a pair of sunglasses. He wasn't trying to hide exactly, but he preferred to observe without causing a commotion. Fame had its perks, but sometimes a man just wanted to eat fried chicken in peace. Just a regular Tuesday check-in, Chuck muttered to himself as he adjusted his cap in the rearview mirror. His business partner Frank Palmer had suggested these surprise visits to keep the staff on their toes. What Frank didn't know was that Chuck genuinely enjoyed these secret stops. They reminded him of simpler times before his face became known worldwide. The restaurant wouldn't be busy at 11:30 a.m., just opening for the lunch rush. Perfect timing to see how things ran when the staff thought no big shots were watching. Chuck stepped out of his truck, stretching his back. At 70-something, he still moved with the grace of a man half his age, though the morning stiffness took a bit longer to shake off these days. As he pushed open the glass door, a small bell jingled. The smell hit him immediately, that perfect mix of fried chicken, fresh biscuits, and their signature honey butter. Chuck breathed deeply, savoring the aroma. The dining area was clean and welcoming with wooden tables and comfortable chairs. Along the walls hung framed movie posters from his films and Walker Texas Ranger memorabilia, along with signed photos of him with various celebrities and politicians. "Welcome to Roundhouse Chicken. What can I kick up for you today?" said the young man behind the counter with practiced cheer. His name tag read, Danny. He couldn't have been more than 20, with sandy brown hair and a spattering of freckles across his nose. The boy didn't show a hint of recognition, which made Chuck smile beneath his sunglasses. Chuck approached the counter slowly, studying the large menu board above. They had added some new items since his last visit. The karate kickin' sandwich was new, as was the 5-finger death punch meal deal. Chuck shook his head slightly. Frank always did have a flair for dramatic names. "Sir, can I help you decide on something?" Danny asked, his pen poised over the order pad. Before Chuck could answer, a woman emerged from the back office. Judy Miller, the manager, was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had been with Roundhouse Chicken since the first restaurant opened. Her eyes widened for just a moment before she composed herself. "Good morning, sir," Judy said with a professional nod that gave nothing away. "Nice day to try some chicken, isn't it?" Chuck nodded back, appreciating her discretion. "Sure is, ma'am. Been hearing good things about this place." Judy smiled knowingly. "Let me know if you need any recommendations." She turned to Danny. "Make sure our customer gets the best service, Danny. I'll be in the back, checking on that. Delivery." She gave Chuck another quick nod before disappearing through the swinging kitchen doors. Danny hadn't picked up on the exchange. "First time here?" he asked, tapping his pen against the counter. "Something like that," Chuck replied, looking up at the menu again. "What's popular these days?" "The Roundhouse Special is our biggest seller. 3 pieces of chicken. You choose. The cuts, with 2 sides and a biscuit. Comes with a drink, too." Chuck nodded. "I'll take that. Breast, thigh, and wing, extra crispy. Mashed potatoes and coleslaw for the sides." "Good choice," Danny said, punching the order into the register. "That'll be $12.95. Chuck handed over a $20 bill. As Danny made change, he noticed more employees arriving for the lunch shift. They came through the front door in their red and gold uniforms, chatting and laughing. Some of them did double takes when they spotted Chuck, but most were too wrapped up in their conversations to notice. "Your order number is 17, Danny said, handing Chuck his receipt and change. "We'll call you when it's ready." Chuck moved to the side of the counter, pretending to look at his phone while observing the restaurant operations. Everything seemed to run smoothly. The kitchen staff moved with purpose, the dining area was spotless, and employees greeted each other warmly. It made him proud to see the business functioning so well. 2 employees stationed themselves at the drink machine, filling cups for the upcoming rush while deep in conversation. The young man, whose name tag read Sam, had dark curly hair and looked to be of Hispanic descent. The young woman, Wendy, according to her tag, was tall with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. "I'm telling you, Billy's been acting weird all week," Sam said in a hushed voice, though not quite hushed enough. "Ever since he sent in that application." Wendy looked around nervously. "Keep it down, will you? You know we're not supposed to talk about it." Chuck's ears perked up, despite himself. He wasn't one to eavesdrop, but something in their tone caught his attention. He moved a little closer, pretending to study the dessert display case. $1 million, Wendy. Can you imagine?" Sam continued, lining up cups on a tray. "Billy says if he wins, he'll split some with the kitchen staff." "He shouldn't have entered without telling Mr. Norris or Mr. Palmer," Wendy replied, looking worried. "It's their recipe." "That's the thing." Sam lowered his voice even more, forcing Chuck to strain to hear. "It's not exactly their recipe anymore. Billy's changed it." Chuck froze, his hand halfway to picking up a napkin. "Change the recipe? His recipe?" "Order number 17, called a voice from the pickup counter, interrupting Chuck's thoughts. He moved to collect his meal, mind racing with questions. The tray was loaded with golden brown chicken, a generous portion of mashed potatoes topped with gravy, a small container of coleslaw, and a fluffy biscuit with a side of honey butter. It looked perfect, exactly how he and Frank had designed the presentation years ago. As Chuck carried his tray to a corner booth with a good view of the entire restaurant, he noticed Judy emerging from the kitchen again, followed by a middle-aged man in a chef's coat. The name Billy was embroidered above the Roundhouse Chicken logo on his chest, so this was the man who had apparently changed Chuck's recipe. Billy was a sturdy man with salt and pepper hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He moved with confidence, checking various stations in the kitchen from the pass-through window. He looked like a man who knew what he was doing, who took pride in his work. Chuck had to give him that much. Chuck sat down and arranged his meal. He always started with a bite of plain chicken first, no sauce, no sides, to judge the quality of the meat and the seasoning. It was a ritual from his childhood, watching his mother fry chicken in their small kitchen in Ryan, Oklahoma. She had taught him that good fried chicken needed nothing extra if it was done right. He picked up the breast piece, noting the perfect golden color and the satisfying crispness as he broke through the coating. Steam rose from the meat as he took a bite. The flavor hit him immediately, savory with hints of pepper and garlic, a touch of something smoky, and a slight sweetness at the finish that he didn't recognize. Chuck paused mid-chew. There was something different. The chicken was moist and tender as always, the coating crisp without being greasy, but the flavor profile had changed. It wasn't drastically different, but to Chuck's experienced palate, the change was unmistakable. There were subtle notes that hadn't been there before, a complexity that elevated the original recipe. As he swallowed that first bite, Chuck looked toward the kitchen where Billy was instructing a young cook. The man had changed Chuck Norris's carefully developed recipe, a recipe that had launched a successful restaurant chain. But the troubling thing was, Chuck had to admit, the chicken tasted better. Chuck took another bite, analyzing the flavors more carefully. Yes, definitely better. Richer, more balanced, with a perfect harmony of spices that complemented rather than overwhelmed the chicken. It was the kind of improvement that could indeed win contests. $1 million contests, apparently, as he continued eating. Chuck watched the restaurant coming to life around him. The lunch crowd began trickling in. Office workers, construction crews, families with young children. Every customer who bit into their meal had the same reaction: satisfaction, sometimes even surprise and delight. Chuck saw it in their faces, the way they paused after the first bite, the small nods of approval. The restaurant was clearly doing well. The question now was what to do about a head chef who had taken liberties with the signature recipe and apparently entered it into some contest without authorization. Chuck Norris had built his reputation on respect and integrity. This situation would require both. Chuck continued eating his meal, savoring each bite while keeping his eyes and ears open. The restaurant was filling up now. The lunch rush had begun, and the staff moved quickly to keep up with orders. Chuck noticed how well they worked together, like a team that had practiced for years. This made him proud, but he couldn't stop thinking about what he had overheard. Someone had changed his recipe and entered it in a contest without asking. Chuck wasn't sure how to feel about this. On one hand, the chicken tasted better. On the other hand, trust was important to Chuck. He had built his whole life on being honest and expecting the same from others. As he dipped a piece of chicken into the gravy, Chuck watched Sam and Wendy again. They had moved to different stations now. Sam was working the fryers, dropping baskets of chicken into the bubbling oil. Wendy was at the packing station placing orders into bags and boxes. They were still talking, though Chuck couldn't hear them anymore. Chuck wiped his hands on a napkin and took a sip of his iced tea. He decided to walk around a bit, maybe get a refill, and position himself closer to the kitchen. He stood up, picked up his cup, and walked to the drink station near the counter. As he filled his cup with fresh tea and ice, he could see through the pickup window into the kitchen. Billy, the head chef, was moving between stations, checking each piece of chicken, tasting sauces, and giving quick instructions to the cooks. He looked like a man in charge, someone who cared about every detail. Chuck moved to the condiment station, pretending to fix his drink while actually getting closer to Sam and Wendy. They had reunited near the pickup counter and were talking, again this time more animated. "I heard the contest ends tomorrow," Sam said as he placed a tray of fresh chicken on the warming rack. "Billy's been checking his phone all morning for news." "He shouldn't have done it," Wendy replied, shaking her head. "Using the company recipe for a personal contest? That's asking for trouble." Sam laughed quietly. "It's not exactly the company recipe anymore, is it? Billy's been changing it little by little for months." Chuck's eyebrows rose above his sunglasses. Months? This hadn't been a one-time thing. "The cayenne pepper was first," Sam continued. "Then he added that smoky paprika his grandfather used. Last month he started using that special honey in the batter instead of regular sugar." Wendy looked nervous. "Mr. Palmer approved the supply orders, but I don't think he knew why Billy was ordering different ingredients." "That's the genius part," Sam said with admiration in his voice. "Billy ordered small amounts at first, mixed with the regular orders. By the time he was ordering larger quantities, the new recipe was already selling better and no one questioned it." Chuck took a slow sip of his tea. So that explained the sweet note he had tasted, honey instead of sugar, and paprika for the smokiness. Clever changes that enhanced rather than changed the core flavor. He had to admit, the modifications showed real culinary skill. "But $1 million, Sam," Wendy whispered. "The Food Masters challenges the biggest cooking contest in the country. What if he wins? What if Mr. Norris finds out?" Sam shrugged. "Billy says he's going to tell them anyway, after he wins. Says he'll offer to split the money with the company. Says it's good. Publicity either way. Order up for table 9. Billy called from the kitchen and both Sam and Wendy jumped back to work. Chuck returned to his table, his mind racing. The Food Masters Challenge was indeed a big deal. He remembered seeing advertisements for it on TV. Major food corporations sponsored it each year, looking for innovative recipes they could market nationwide. The $1 million prize was just the beginning. The winning recipe often led to big licensing deals and national recognition. As Chuck sat down, he noticed Judy watching him from near the kitchen doors. She had been keeping an eye on him, probably wondering if he was going to make a scene. Chuck gave her a small nod, letting her know he was fine. She seemed to relax a little and went back to helping a customer. Chuck finished his mashed potatoes, which were creamy and perfectly seasoned. The coleslaw had the right balance of tanginess and sweetness. Everything was excellent. No wonder business was good. But the situation with Billy and the recipe troubled him. In his years as a martial artist, actor, and businessman, Chuck had learned that problems were best faced directly. Hiding from conflict only made it grow. He decided he would talk to Billy before leaving. But first he wanted to enjoy the rest of his meal and observe a bit more. The restaurant was in full swing now. Every table was filled with happy customers. The sounds of conversation and laughter mixed with the clinking of utensils and the occasional ding of the kitchen bell. Chuck watched families sharing meals, couples on lunch dates, and workers grabbing quick bites before heading back to their jobs. This was what he and Frank had envisioned when they started Roundhouse Chicken, a place where good food brought people together. As Chuck ate the last bite of his biscuit, the front door opened and a delivery man walked in carrying a large box. He went straight to the counter where Judy signed for the package. Chuck watched as she called Billy from the kitchen. The chef came out, wiping his hands on his apron. His face lit up when he saw the box. Billy quickly took the package to a small office behind the counter. Through the glass window, Chuck could see him opening it carefully. Inside were bottles and jars of various sizes. Spices, Chuck guessed. Maybe ingredients for the secret recipe. Billy took out a small jar and held it up to the light, examining it with a smile. He placed it on the desk, then noticed Chuck watching him. For a moment, their eyes met. Even through his sunglasses, Chuck could tell that Billy recognized him. The chef froze, the smile dropping from his face. Then slowly, he put the jar back in the box and closed it. Chuck decided it was time. He stood up, collected his trash onto his tray, and walked to the garbage station. After disposing of his trash and placing his tray on the stack, he made his way toward the counter. Judy saw him coming and moved to intercept him. "Mr. Norris," she said quietly when they were face to face. "I hope everything was satisfactory today." "The food was excellent," Chuck replied honestly. "But I think we need to talk about some changes that have been made to my recipe." Judy's face paled slightly. "I see. Would you like to use my office?" Chuck nodded. "And please ask Billy to join us." Judy bit her lip but nodded. "Of course, right this way." She led Chuck to her small office, at the back of the restaurant. It was neat and organized with schedules and inventory lists pinned to a corkboard on the wall. A desk with a computer sat in one corner and 2 chairs faced it. Chuck took one of the chairs while Judy went to get Billy. Through the office window, Chuck could see Billy receiving the news from Judy. The chef's shoulders slumped, and he ran, a hand through his salt and pepper hair. Then he squared his shoulders, took a deep breath, and followed Judy to the office. Billy entered the room looking nervous but determined. Chuck had seen that look many times, on actors before difficult stunts, on fighters before important matches, on business people before big deals. It was the look of someone who knew they might be in trouble but was ready to stand by their actions. "Mr. Norris," Billy said, his voice surprisingly steady. "It's an honor to meet you, sir. I've been head chef here for 3 years now." "I know who you are, Billy," Chuck said calmly. "What I don't know is why you changed my chicken recipe without permission and then entered it in a contest." Billy swallowed hard but met Chuck's gaze. "Sir, I can explain everything. But first, I want you to know that I never meant any disrespect. I love working here and I believe in Roundhouse Chicken. What I did because I thought it would make things better." Chuck studied the man standing before him. Billy didn't look like someone trying to steal or cheat. He looked like a man who believed in what he was doing, even if his methods weren't quite right. "I'm listening," Chuck said, removing his sunglasses so he could look Billy in the eye properly. "Tell me about this $1 million secret of yours." Billy sat down in the chair across from Chuck, his hands resting on his knees. Judy stood by the door looking back and forth between the 2 men. The small office felt even smaller now, filled with tension that seemed to press against the walls. "May I close the door?" Billy asked, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. Chuck nodded and Judy stepped outside, closing the door behind her. Through the window, Chuck could see the restaurant still buzzing with the lunch crowd. Life went on, unaware of the important conversation happening in this tiny room. "Mr. Norris," Billy began, "I've been cooking all my life. My grandfather was a chef in New Orleans, and my father ran a barbecue place in Memphis. I learned from both of them, and they taught me that a good recipe is never truly finished. It can always be made better." Chuck listened without interrupting. He believed in giving people a chance to explain themselves before making judgments. "When I started working here," Billy continued, "I loved the food right away. Your chicken recipe is solid, Good flavor, good texture, consistent results. But after a few months, I started to wonder if it could be even better. Billy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. It was worn at the edges, the pages yellowed from use. He placed it on the desk between them. This is my recipe journal. I've kept it for 20 years. Every idea, every change, every test. It's all in here. He flipped it open to a page marked with a red tab. This is where I started working on your recipe. Chuck leaned forward to look at the neat handwriting. The page was dated from nearly 2 years ago. Notes and measurements filled the margins, with words crossed out and rewritten many times. I started small, Billy explained. A pinch more of this, a little less of that. I tested each change on small batches and kept notes on customer reactions. When something worked, I kept it. When it didn't, I went back to the original. Chuck had to admit he was impressed by the chef's methodical approach. You did all this testing during regular shifts? Billy nodded. Yes, sir. I would prepare a special batch each day and offer it as a limited sample. The customers never knew they were helping me refine the recipe. They just thought they were getting a free taste. Smart, Chuck admitted. But why didn't you tell management what you were doing? Billy sighed and closed his notebook. I tried at first. I sent emails to Mr. Palmer with some suggestions. He always replied that the recipe was set and shouldn't be changed. After the third email, he told me to focus on maintaining consistency, not creating new recipes. Chuck made a mental note to talk to Frank about this. His business partner was great with numbers, but sometimes too rigid with creative matters. So you went behind our backs, Chuck said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Billy looked down at his hands. Yes, sir, I did. And I know that was wrong. But I believed so strongly that these changes would help the business grow, and they have. Sales are up 30% since I fully implemented the new recipe 6 months ago. Chuck raised an eyebrow. 30%? That's significant. Yes, sir. We're serving more customers, and they're coming back more often. We've had to hire 3 new people just to keep up with demand. Chuck remembered the busy dining room, the happy customers. He had noticed the place was doing well but hadn't realized it was doing that well. And now this contest, Chuck said, steering the conversation back to the main issue. Tell me about that. Billy's face brightened with excitement, despite the serious situation. The Foodmasters Challenge is the biggest cooking contest in the country. This year they're focusing on fast casual restaurant recipes that could be marketed nationwide. The grand prize is $1 million, plus a contract with Food Corp to distribute the winning recipe in grocery stores. And you entered our chicken recipe? Chuck asked, his voice neutral. Billy shook his head. Not exactly, sir. I entered my version of the recipe, the one I've been perfecting for almost 2 years. The one that customers have been loving. Chuck leaned back in his chair. The one you created while working for me, using my restaurant, my equipment, and my basic recipe as a starting point. Billy's excitement dimmed. Yes, sir, that's true. I can't deny that. And you didn't think to ask permission before entering this contest? I was afraid you'd say no, Billy admitted. Or that Mr. Palmer would shut me down before I could explain. The deadline was coming up and I just went for it. Chuck stood up and walked to the small window overlooking the restaurant. From this angle, he could see the kitchen. The cooks were moving efficiently, preparing food for the hungry customers. He could see Sam dropping fresh chicken into the fryer, using the recipe that Billy had changed. How far have you gotten in this contest? Chuck asked, still looking out the window. To the finals, Billy replied, a note of pride creeping into his voice. 10 recipes out of thousands of entries. They announce the winner tomorrow. Chuck turned back to face Billy. And what were you planning to do if you won? Billy sat up straighter. I was going to come clean right away, tell you and Mr. Palmer everything, offer to split the prize money with the company, and work out a deal for the future. I never intended to take all the credit or the money. But you didn't think to tell us before entering? No, sir, that was my mistake. I was afraid. Chuck nodded slowly, thinking. He valued honesty, but he also valued initiative and passion. Billy had shown both, even if his methods were questionable. "I'd like to try the original recipe and your version side by side," Chuck said finally. Billy looked surprised, but nodded, quickly. "Of course, I can prepare both right now." "Good. And I want to see your exact recipe, the one you entered in the contest." Billy hesitated for just a moment, then reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is it, my final version. I carry it with me everywhere." He handed the paper to Chuck, who unfolded it carefully. The recipe was detailed, with precise measurements and clear instructions. Chuck could see the foundations of his original recipe, but with significant changes and additions. The list of spices was longer, the preparation more complex. "This honey here," Chuck said, pointing to one ingredient. "Is this what gives it that subtle sweetness at the finish?" Billy smiled, pleased that Chuck had noticed. "Yes, sir, it's wildflower honey from a local beekeeper. It adds sweetness without being overpowering and helps the coating caramelize perfectly." Chuck continued reading the recipe. He recognized most of the techniques, but some were new to him. "You brine the chicken for 24 hours. We never did that. It makes a huge difference in moisture retention," Billy explained, warming to the subject, "especially for the breast meat, which tends to dry out during frying." As Chuck read through the recipe, he had to admit it was impressive. The chef had taken a good product and made thoughtful, careful improvements. Each change had a purpose, a reason behind it. This wasn't random tinkering. It was skilled refinement. Chuck folded the paper and handed it back to Billy. "Let's go to the kitchen. I want to taste both versions." They left the office and walked through the restaurant toward the kitchen. Judy gave them a questioning look as they passed, but Chuck just nodded to let her know things were under control. The lunch rush was starting to slow down, with only a few tables still occupied. The timing was good for what Chuck had in mind. In the kitchen, Billy quickly took charge, directing the staff to clear a space for his demonstration. He moved with confidence here, in his element among the stoves and fryers. Chuck watched as the chef gathered ingredients, explaining each one as he worked. "We'll start with the original recipe," Billy said, mixing flour and spices in a large bowl. "Then we'll do the new version so you can compare them fresh." Chuck stood back, letting Billy work. The other kitchen staff watched curiously, sensing that something important was happening but not knowing exactly what. Sam and Wendy exchanged nervous glances from their stations. As Billy prepared the 2 batches of chicken, he explained each step, pointing out the differences between the original recipe and his version. Chuck listened carefully, impressed by the chef's knowledge and attention to detail. When both batches were frying, Billy turned to Chuck. "It'll be about 15 minutes until they're ready. Would you like to sit down while we wait?" Chuck shook his head. "I'll stay here and watch. I want to see your whole process." Billy nodded and continued working, checking the temperature of the oil, adjusting the heat, turning the chicken pieces at just the right time. His movements were precise and practiced, the result of years of experience. Finally, both batches were done. Billy arranged them on separate plates, the original recipe on a red plate and the new version on a blue one. He placed them on the prep table and stepped back. "Ready when you are, Mr. Norris." Chuck approached the table, looking at both plates. The chicken pieces looked similar, but there were subtle differences in color and texture. He picked up a piece from the red plate first, his original recipe. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and swallowed. Then he tried a piece from the blue plate, Billy's version. The difference was immediately apparent. The flavor was richer, more complex, with layers that unfolded as he chewed. The meat was juicier, the coating crispier without being harder. Chuck took another bite of each, comparing them carefully. There was no denying it. The new version was better, much better. He put down both pieces and looked. Chuck looked at Billy for a long moment. The kitchen had gone completely silent. All the staff had stopped what they were doing to watch. Even the sounds from the dining area seemed far away, as if the whole world was waiting for Chuck Norris to speak. "Your version is better," Chuck said simply. The tension in Billy's shoulders eased a little, but his face remained serious. He knew that admitting the recipe was better didn't mean he was off the hook for what he had done. "Thank you, sir," Billy said. "I worked hard on it." Chuck picked up another piece of chicken from the blue plate and took another bite. He chewed, slowly, thinking about the situation. On one hand, Billy had gone behind his back, changed a core product without permission, and entered a contest without telling anyone. On the other hand, he had created something truly excellent that was helping the business grow. "Everyone back to work," Chuck said to the watching staff. "Billy and I need to continue our conversation privately." The kitchen staff quickly returned to their tasks, though Chuck noticed they were moving slowly, trying to stay within earshot. He motioned for Billy to follow him to a small break room off the main kitchen. Once inside, he closed the door. "Tell me about your family," Chuck said, surprising Billy with the question. Billy hesitated, then sat down at the small table. "My wife Linda and I have been married for 22 years. We have 2 kids. Jack is in college studying engineering and Molly is a senior in high school. And your mother? I overheard something about medical bills." Billy's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't realized Chuck had heard so much. "Yes, my mother has been sick for the past year. Cancer. She's getting better, but the treatments are expensive. Her insurance doesn't cover everything." Chuck nodded. This added another layer to the story. Billy wasn't just seeking glory or money for himself. He had real needs, real people depending on him. "If you win this contest tomorrow, what would you do with the money?" Chuck asked. Billy didn't hesitate. "Pay off my mother's medical bills first. That would take about $200,000. Then set aside money for Molly's college. She wants to go to culinary school, follow in my footsteps." He smiled proudly at that. "The rest I'd split with the restaurant, like I said. It's only fair since I developed the recipe here." Chuck leaned back in his chair, studying Billy's face. The man seemed sincere. His priorities were in the right place. Family first, then fair dealing with the business. "You know, legally speaking, any recipe you develop while working for us belongs to the company," Chuck said. "That's standard in employment contracts." Billy nodded slowly. "I know. I read the fine print when I signed on. That's part of why I was afraid to come forward. I thought you might just take the recipe and fire me for changing it without permission." "I could do that," Chuck agreed. "But that's not how I do business. I believe in treating people fairly." Billy looked relieved but still cautious. "What are you going to do, Mr. Norris?" Chuck stood up and walked to the small window that looked out onto the alley behind the restaurant. A delivery truck was backing up to the loading dock. Life continued, work continued, while big decisions were being made in this little room. I'm going to call Frank," Chuck said. "He's my business partner and he needs to be part of this conversation. But before I do that, I want to be very clear about something." He turned back to Billy, his expression serious. "What bothers me most isn't that you changed the recipe. It's that you didn't trust us enough to bring your ideas forward properly. Trust is everything in business, Billy. Without it, partnerships fall apart." Billy looked down at his hands. "You're right. I should have pushed harder to be heard. I should have asked to meet with you directly if Mr. Palmer wasn't listening. I took the easy way out by going behind your backs, and that was wrong." Chuck appreciated the honest admission. Too many people tried to justify their mistakes rather than owning them. "Yes, it was wrong," Chuck agreed. "But I understand why you did it. Sometimes the system doesn't make it easy to do things the right way." He pulled out his cell phone. "I'm going to call Frank now. While I do that, I want you to write down everything about this contest. When you entered, what the rules are, when the winner is announced. Everything. Can you do that?" Billy nodded and took a notepad and pen from his pocket. He began writing while Chuck stepped into the hallway to make his call. Frank Palmer answered on the 3rd ring. "Chuck, this is a surprise. How's the fishing trip going?" Chuck had told Frank he was going fishing for a few days. It was his usual excuse when he wanted to make surprise visits to the restaurants without alerting management. "I'm not fishing, Frank. I'm at the Dallas restaurant." "Oh." Frank's tone changed immediately. "Is something wrong?" "Yes and no. I need you to come down here as soon as possible. We have a situation with our head chef and our chicken recipe. Frank groaned. Billy Nixon? I knew that guy was trouble. Always wanting to change things, never satisfied with following the plan. What's he done now? Chuck could hear the judgment in Frank's voice, the quick leap to negative conclusions. This was exactly why Billy had been afraid to bring his ideas forward. Just come down here, Frank. We need to talk in person. How soon can you get here? I can be there in 30 minutes. I'm at the office. Good. See you then. Chuck ended the call and went back into the break room. Billy had filled a page with notes about the contest. He looked up as Chuck entered. I wrote everything down. The judging was yesterday. They taste tested all 10 finalist recipes. The winner will be announced tomorrow at noon in a live online broadcast. If I win, there's a ceremony in New York. Next week. Chuck took the notepad and read through Billy's notes. The contest was run by Food Corp, one of the largest food companies in America. The judges included famous chefs and food critics. This was a serious, prestigious competition. Your chicken really has a chance of winning this? Chuck asked. Billy nodded confidently. Yes, sir. The judges' comments during the tasting were very positive. One of them said it was the best fried chicken he'd ever tasted. Chuck couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride at that, even though the recipe wasn't entirely his anymore. Roundhouse Chicken was still his creation, his vision. Frank will be here in about half an hour, Chuck said. In the meantime, I want to try something else from the menu, something that uses your modified recipe. Surprise me. Billy's eyes lit up at the chance to show off more of his cooking. Yes, sir. I know just the thing. They went back to the main kitchen where Billy quickly began preparing a special dish. Chuck watched as the chef worked, noting his confidence and skill. The other staff seemed to respect Billy, following his instructions without question. Here we go, Billy said a few minutes later, presenting Chuck with a plate. Our Nashville hot chicken sandwich, but with my special touch. The sandwich looked amazing. A large piece of fried chicken coated in a glossy red sauce topped with pickles and coleslaw, all on a toasted brioche bun. Chuck took a big bite and was immediately hit with a perfect balance of heat, sweetness, and tang. The chicken remained crisp despite the sauce, and the meat was juicy and flavorful. This is excellent, Chuck said after swallowing. You've got real talent, Billy. Thank you, sir. Billy replied, clearly pleased by the compliment. They were interrupted by Judy, who poked her head into the kitchen. Mr. Norris, Mr. Palmer is here. He seems upset. Chuck nodded. Send him back. A moment later, Frank Palmer burst into the kitchen. He was a tall, thin man with glasses and a perpetually worried expression. Today that expression was even more pronounced. Chuck, what's going on? Frank asked, then spotted Billy. His eyes narrowed. What did he do? Chuck put a hand on Frank's shoulder. Calm down, Frank. Let's go somewhere quiet and talk this through. Frank looked like he wanted to argue but nodded stiffly. Fine. Where? Judy's office should be free, Chuck suggested. Billy, bring samples of both chicken recipes and join us there. Both recipes? Frank asked, confused. I'll explain everything, Chuck promised, steering his partner toward the office. Just keep an open mind. As they walked away, Chuck glanced back at Billy. The chef was already preparing the samples, his movements quick and precise. For all his mistakes in handling the situation, the man clearly cared about his work. That counted for a lot in Chuck's book. Now came the hard part, convincing Frank that this problem might actually be an opportunity in disguise. Chuck had a feeling it wouldn't be easy, but then again, few worthwhile things in life were. They entered Judy's office and Chuck closed the door. It was time for the real confrontation to begin. Frank paced back and forth in the small office, his face red with anger. He had just finished tasting both chicken recipes, and like Chuck, he could tell the difference. Billy stood near the door, waiting quietly for the verdict. Chuck sat behind Judy's desk, watching his business partner carefully. I don't care if it tastes better, Frank said, his voice tight. That's not the point. The point is that he went behind our backs. He changed our signature product without permission. He entered our recipe in a contest without telling us. These are fireable offenses, Chuck, you know that. Chuck nodded calmly. I understand your position, Frank. And from a strictly business standpoint, you're right. Billy's shoulders slumped at these words. He had hoped Chuck would defend him more strongly. But, Chuck continued, business isn't just about rules and procedures. It's about people. It's about recognizing talent and initiative, even when it doesn't follow the proper channels. Frank stopped pacing and turned to face Chuck. So you're saying we should just let this slide? What kind of message does that send to our other employees? That they can do whatever they want as long as it turns out okay in the end? No, Chuck replied firmly. I'm not suggesting we ignore what happened. There should be consequences for breaking trust. But those consequences don't have to include firing a talented chef who has helped our business grow. Frank adjusted his glasses, a habit he had when he was thinking hard. What are you suggesting then? Chuck turned to Billy. If you win this contest tomorrow, what exactly happens? Billy straightened up. There's a press announcement online at noon. If I win, they'll call me. Then there's a formal ceremony in New York next week where they present the check and announce plans for distributing the recipe nationally. And the recipe would be sold under what name? Chuck asked. Under my name as the creator, Billy replied. But I was planning to include Roundhouse Chicken in my acceptance speech, to give credit to where I developed it. Frank scoffed. How generous of you. Chuck held up a hand to quiet his partner. Billy, step outside for a moment, please. Frank and I need to discuss this privately. Billy nodded and left the office, closing the door behind him. Through the window, Chuck could see him waiting in the hallway, looking anxious. You're too soft, Chuck, Frank said once they were alone. This is business. We can't let personal feelings cloud our judgment. Chuck leaned forward in his chair. Do you remember when we started this company, Frank? We had one small restaurant and a dream. We took risks. We broke some rules along the way. Frank's expression softened slightly at the memory. That was different. It was our company, our risk to take. And now it's a successful chain with 15 locations, Chuck said. But success can make us rigid, afraid to try new things. When's the last time we updated our menu? Changed a recipe? Took a real risk? Frank sat down in the chair across from Chuck. We've been consistent, that's why people come back. Consistency is important, Chuck agreed. But so is improvement. This chef took our good recipe and made it great. Sales are up 30% since he implemented his changes. Customers love it. Isn't that what we want? Frank sighed. Of course that's what we want. But no buts, Chuck interrupted. I've made my decision. I want to offer Billy a deal and I need you on board. Frank looked skeptical, but nodded. What kind of deal? Chuck outlined his plan quickly. Frank raised several objections, but eventually, he began to nod as he saw the potential benefits. After 15 minutes of discussion, they reached an agreement. Okay, Frank said finally. We'll try it your way. But if this backfires, it won't, Chuck assured him. Trust me on this. Chuck called Billy back into the office. The chef entered slowly, his face showing that he expected the worst. Sit down, Billy, Chuck said, gesturing to the empty chair. Billy sat, his back straight, eyes moving between Chuck and Frank. We've reached a decision, Chuck began. What you did was wrong. You broke our trust, and that's serious. In many companies, it would be grounds for immediate termination. Billy nodded, accepting the criticism. I understand, sir. However, Chuck continued, we also recognize that your changes to the recipe have improved our product and helped our business grow. That counts for something. Billy looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Here's what we're proposing, Chuck said. If you win the contest tomorrow, you will publicly acknowledge that the recipe was developed while working at Roundhouse Chicken. You will share the prize money with the company, 50-50, and the recipe will be marketed under a joint. Label your name and ours together. Billy's eyes widened. You mean I'd keep half the money, and my name would still be on the recipe? Yes, Chuck confirmed. But there's more. We want to create a new position within the company, Executive Chef and Recipe Development Director. You would be responsible for maintaining quality across all locations and developing new menu items. It would come with a significant raise and a small percentage of company profits. Billy looked stunned. You're offering me a promotion? After what I did? Frank spoke up for the first time. Don't think this means we approve of how you handled things. This is your second chance, there won't be a third. I understand, Billy said quickly. I won't let you down again. Thank you. Thank you both. Don't thank us yet, Chuck said. This all depends on you winning that contest tomorrow. Billy smiled confidently. I'll win. Chuck stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Then we'll all watch the announcement together tomorrow, here at the restaurant, noon sharp. The next day, Chuck arrived at the restaurant at 11:30. Frank was already there looking nervous. Billy had come in early to prepare a special lunch for everyone. The dining area had been rearranged, with a large TV screen set up at one end showing the Foodmasters Challenge website. The entire staff was present, including Judy, Sam, and Wendy. Word had spread about what was happening, and there was an atmosphere of excited tension in the air. Chuck noticed that Billy had prepared platters of his special chicken for everyone to enjoy during the announcement. As noon approached, Billy joined Chuck and Frank at their table. He looked like he hadn't slept much, but his eyes were bright with anticipation. Whatever happens, Billy said, I want to thank you both for giving me this opportunity. I won't forget it. Chuck nodded, and even Frank managed a small smile. The website on the screen changed, showing a countdown to the live announcement. The room grew quiet as everyone watched the numbers tick down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A cheerful host appeared on screen, welcoming viewers to the Foodmasters Challenge final announcement. He talked about the competition, the judges, and the 10 finalists. Pictures of each dish appeared on screen, including Billy's golden brown fried chicken. And now, the host said dramatically, the moment you've all been waiting for, the winner of this year's Foodmasters Challenge and the recipient of $1 million is... The room was completely silent. Chuck could hear his own heartbeat. Billy Nixon from Dallas, Texas for his honey-brined southern fried chicken. The restaurant erupted in cheers. Staff members jumped up, hugging each other and clapping. Billy sat frozen in his chair, a look of shock on his face. Then tears filled his eyes and he covered his face with his hands. Chuck put a hand on Billy's shoulder. Congratulations, son. You did it. Billy looked up, his face wet with tears but beaming with joy. We did it, Mr. Norris. Roundhouse Chicken did it. Frank, to everyone's surprise, stood up and raised his glass of iced tea. To Billy Nixon and the future of Roundhouse Chicken. Everyone raised their glasses, cheering again. Billy's phone rang. It was the contest organizers calling to confirm his win. He answered, his voice shaking with emotion as he thanked them and confirmed he would be at the ceremony in New York. After the call ended, Billy turned to Chuck and Frank. I meant what I said. We did this together. I couldn't have created this recipe without the foundation you built. I promise I'll make you both proud. Chuck nodded, feeling satisfied with how things had turned out. A mistake had been made, but it had led to something good. Trust had been broken, but it could be rebuilt, stronger than before. 1 month later, Chuck sat in his home office, looking at the latest sales figures. Since the contest win and the publicity surrounding it, Roundhouse Chicken had seen a 60% increase in business across all locations. They had opened 3 new restaurants and were planning 5 more by the end of the year. Billy had proven himself worthy of his new position, developing 2 new menu items that were already customer favorites. He had paid off his mother's medical bills, and she was now cancer-free. His daughter had been accepted to culinary school with a full scholarship, inspired by her father's success. Chuck smiled as he closed the sales report. Sometimes the best decisions weren't the most obvious ones. Sometimes you had to look beyond the mistake to see the person who made it. Sometimes $1 million secret was worth hearing, even if it froze you in your tracks at first. He picked up the phone to call Billy. He had an idea for a new restaurant concept, and he knew just the chef to help him develop it.